Hi, it's Karen at the Cool Tool Studio. I'm here today to share with you guys how I like to set my small stones in precious metal clay. Here's what you need for this technique. I have a clay board, clay thickness rolling frames, tough cards, a medium sanding stick, and sanding pads. I'm working with Easy 960 sterling clay today, a jeweler's saw frame with a size 1 blade, and a miter cutting jig. I have a snake maker, a set of tweezers, stone setting burrs, and I'm going to be working with size 1mm through 4mm, a small hand drill, a hot plate, a wickway with a brush, and an assortment of small stones. Before we dive right in, let's take a look at what kind of setting we're going to be making. When I was studying metalsmithing, one of the first settings I learned to do was a tube setting. So I'm kind of adapted that into metal clay for this technique. And it looks kind of like a bezel setting, only we're going to be constructing a tube, cutting a seat for a stone, and then placing it in and firing it in place. I really like to do this type of setting for little accent stones, and I just think it's a lot more straightforward and less fussy than trying to use precision hole punches or syringe for setting very small stones. So now that you know what you're getting into, let's get to it. So for this technique, we're going to be making coils that we're going to have act as our tubes for our settings. And in order to do that, we're going to use clay thickness rolling frames and stack them up for the appropriate height. In preparing this video, I went ahead and found out how many clay thickness rolling frames you needed to make your tubes for each size stone. So we're going to post a chart for you to make that easier for you. Today I'm going to be showing you how to set a 1.75mm stone, and for that I used 10 cards thickness. So I'm just going to grab my 8 and my 2, get these guys out of the way. I'm going to take my piece of clay here, got my snake maker, I'm going to gently roll back and forth to turn it into a coil. And I'm not using Cool Slip because it actually kind of is helpful to have your clay stick a little bit for this process. Alright, so there's my coil. I'm going to pick it up, put it on a tough card, and then you want it to be as straight as possible for this technique, so I just take my thickness frames and just kind of knock it from the side, just straighten it back out, and then I'm going to move it off to the side to dry it on some heat, and that's just going to speed things up for us. So I actually have one that I've prepared that's already dry, and when I'm doing this, I like to kind of just build myself a library. So I started at 6 cards and then built my way all the way through up to 18 cards thickness, and that's what I use for my 4mm stones. That way they're just ready to go and on hand for whenever I want to set a small stone. So I'm going to take my 10 cards thickness that's already dried, and then I'm going to grab my miter cutting jig. So this is one of my absolute favorite tools. It's really handy and it's great for precise work. I like to use them not only for setting stones, but they're also a great way to support your hinge knuckles to make them nice and level. But today we're going to be using it to cut our settings to the proper height and then hold them in place while we drill our holes and cut our seats. So however tall you want your setting to be, you're going to set this just a little bit taller, because you got to have room for your cut and for some sanding. So you use these to tighten. And just as a note, we're using the 90-degree one. There's a 45-degree option as well down here at the end, but we want a nice flat face. I've got my jeweler's saw frame, and I just have a size 1 blade in there. And I like to kind of prop it up here on its side, and then just cut straight down. And not a lot of pressure here. Just snap it off. I'm going to take my excess out and then place my tube back into the jig and kind of tap it around until it's sitting levelly that face there. There's a little bit excess there I'm going to sand off. And again, this tool gives you a nice flat, even face there. That way you know that your setting is going to be nice and flat and level. So there's that all cleaned up. And then for this part, I like to kind of loosen it, tap it out just a little bit. I think it's a little bit easier to kind of eyeball where center is and keep things level. And I'm going to grab my hand drill. So now that I've got my coil with a nice flat face to it, I'm ready to drill a hole. And I'm just kind of eyeballing at center here. Kind of place and then kind of pull back and look. Does that look about center? Sure it does. So now I'm going to apply some gentle downward pressure while rotating to drill a hole. This is going to allow for light to pass through the back of this setting and really let your stone sparkle. So I'm going to kind of dust that away. And it also provides you a place to center your burr. So the burrs that we carry go from 1 millimeter straight to 2 millimeter. There's no option for 1.75, but that's the size stone that I want to set. So I'm just going to be using the larger one and not using all of the burr. I'm just going to kind of cut a little bit and check my stone, cut a little bit, check my stone until it's fitting properly. So you can mount this in your pin vise if you want. I'm just going to use it in my hands. And again, just kind of straight down. You want to make sure that you're not using your burrs at an angle. And then it's helpful to kind of dust as you go. So I have this larger stone so we can actually see what I'm trying to talk about here. On your stone, you have what is called the girdle. And that is where the kind of from down to the point is called the pavilion. And then it transitions at the girdle here. And then from here up is the crown. And when you're making metal clay settings, the clay has to come above the girdle. That way, as it shrinks, it's going to kind of pull in and make a lip there. If it's below here, then it's going to shrink and just pop your stone out. So you want to make sure that the clay comes above your girdle here. So that's what I'm checking for when I've got my setting in the vise here. And I'm actually going to have to pick it up to see. And it's not quite deep enough. I can see that girdle sitting on top there. As another side note, optivisors can be helpful for this if you're finding yourself having a hard time seeing. They really help you be precise when dealing with small things. So I'm going to take my burr and cut that seat a little bit deeper. So we're going to check it again. Kind of tapping it level there. And again, I'm going to have to run off with it to see if we are level. All right, so that looks good. The girdle is underneath my clay, and at this point, I like to take the stone out and I'm going to pull on my wickway here with a brush, and this is just to kind of tack it in place while I'm working. It's certainly not going to attach your CZ to the clay, but it's helpful to have it kind of there to just tack it in place while you're working. So I'm again tapping it in, making sure it's level. If you wanted to, if you're not super confident in this flat edge there, you can bring out your snake maker again and use that. All right, so I'm going to open this up. And I usually kind of just like tap it and let it fall back. And there's my setting. So again, this is the type of setting that I used for these little accent stones in this ring here. And I just used the water, that way I can turn it upside down and it's not going to go anywhere. That's just handy for when you're refining your pieces. You're not having your stone tumble out, losing them in your carpet and crying yourself to sleep. So now that I've got my setting, if you like the really squared edge on your setting, you can leave it. Or you can take a microfine sanding pad and just kind of very gently go along that edge to soften it out some. And also, if this top face is dry, you can really quickly run it over. You don't want to be sanding too much at this point because, again, if you remove material, your stone is going to be sitting too high in your setting and will pop out when you fire. So just really quick surface cleanup. So that's basically the whole process. As you can see here, you can use this technique for itty bitty stones and for slightly larger stones as well. You just have to make sure that you have the proper stone setting burr to use alongside your stones. There are lots of different ways that you can set stones in precious metal clay, but I think this has to be my favorite. It makes setting even small stones really simple. I hope you give it a shot. Thanks for watching.
Visit our Learning Center at cooltools.us for more cool jewelry making videos. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and be sure to sign up for our email list to be the first to hear about new videos, new products, and other cool stuff from Cool Tools.